This is History 202, Presentation 6, Lecture 6, The Rise of Big Business and the Gilded Age. All right, so what we're going to look at today is kind of this continuation of Reconstruction policy. What I mean by that is the economic Reconstruction policy that would lead to the Gilded Age, the late 19th century. So we talked about in the early phases of the course, in Quiz 1, how there was going to be an economic restructuring. In fact, in the first presentation, I mentioned this. So the Hamiltonian system will be implemented, and that will result in government promotion of industry, commerce, and finance. And so the end result of that is really the Gilded Age, the rise of big business. So oftentimes their critique of this particular period of time centers on the fact that you had all these people making all this money, and of course it was supposed to be capitalism that did this, but it really wasn't the free market. What did this was government intervention in the economy, the government promotion of it. So government essentially getting in bed with big business and creating a climate that would allow this to happen. Now, you can look at it in a way where, this is a negative thing. You can look at it as a positive thing. That's up to you how you view this. But essentially, that's what's going on. This is part of the economic restructuring or reconstruction, recreation of the United States. What will happen is that what you're going to get is the government will still promote business on one hand. On the other hand, they'll start to regulate it. So a true free market, a true laissez-faire system, which I'll talk about in a second, is absence of government either promotion or regulation, which we've never really had in the United States except for a very short amount of time in the early 19th century. So the Gilded Age, of course, is the late 19th century, the 1800s. Mark Twain called this period the Gilded Age because gilding is a process by which gold is plated onto a surface that's not as valuable. This is also called the age of the nouveau riche, or the new rich. And so a lot of the people that had a lot of money in this period of time were rags to riches stories. They weren't old money. This is new money. This is why Twain called it the Gilded Age. You have these people that aren't so rich underneath. They've just gotten some money and they're showing it off. And again, much of the wealth of this period was acquired due to help from the Republican-controlled governments. This is economic reconstruction. So this is not a period of laissez-faire economics, contrary to popular belief. If these people were not being helped by the government, particularly the railroad industry, and that was where you had the most corruption, but even the steel industry and some of the other industries that are going on in this particular period of time, the oil industry, but steel most importantly, you had high tariffs which allowed these industries to be free of foreign competition, and so they can manipulate the market, manipulate prices and other things, even though, as I'll mention when we get to Carnegie, the price of steel actually decreased rapidly once Carnegie started taking over the steel industry. Same thing happened with the oil industry and Rockefeller. But anyways, a lot of the things that were going on here are facilitated by the central government. Matthew Josephson called the men who prospered during this period robber barons. So he has a very negative opinion of these people. Others call them captains of industry or industrial statesmen. Really depends on your political leanings. So if you like these people, you're going to call them maybe captains of industry or industrial statesmen. If you don't, you're going to call them the robber barons. So you have two different views of the particular period of time. And this period is often looked at by, say, leftist historians or Marxists as a period of unbridled capitalism. This is the problem of capitalism. On the other hand, you'll have people look at it and say, well, no, this is when the United States was working well, the wheels were being greased, we had tremendous wealth, and of course that's going to improve the standard of living for people. And some of the reactions we'll talk about in the next presentation really come out of the process by which the United States is rapidly industrializing here. So many of the most powerful American families rose to prominence during this period. Many of them were rags to riches stories, as I just said before, and this created the popular American ideal that if you work hard enough, you can achieve anything. If you work hard enough, you can be Bill Gates. If you work hard enough, you can be Steve Jobs. If you work hard enough, you can be Andrew Carnegie or John Rockefeller. Well, that's sort of true. I mean, there are these success stories in the United States, but there's only one Bill Gates and one Steve Jobs and one Andrew Carnegie and one John Rockefeller, so your chances are fairly slim, but it is possible. I would say it was more possible in this time, though, to make a lot of money than it is today, because there is so much regulation of business that it almost has become physically impossible to make the amount of money that these people made. Even if you look at Bill Gates, his wealth paled in comparison to people like Rockefeller and Carnegie. So they're very, very wealthy, billionaires. But the people that we're going to talk about, trump them many times over. So the rich in the late 19th century were the most wealthy, or more wealthy, I should say, than in any previous or subsequent period, and really set the standard for American luxury and leisure in the upper class. So Some of the major industries during the Gilded Age were railroads, steel, oil, petroleum products, finance and commerce, and all of these industries or businesses were facilitated by a new central banking system, faster mail delivery, the telegraph, and in many instances, government support. So let's talk about some of these rich guys. First and foremost, there's Henry Flagler of New York. He was a railroad pioneer who actually founded Miami, Florida. Flagler decided that rich New Yorkers needed a place to go in the wintertime to get out of the winters of New York, so they built a rail line straight down to the tip of Florida, which nobody thought was even important at the time. And, of course, that rail line is going to bring these people down to Miami, and it's going to become a playground for the wealthy New Yorkers in this period of time. And even today, if you look at Florida, the southern part of Florida, the tip, is much different from the panhandle of Florida in terms of the makeup of the people who live there. A lot of people from the north moved to the southern part of Florida, in Tampa down. So that area of Florida is much more influenced by New York than it is Florida or the south. So you have the part of Florida that's very much like the south, which is Pensacola, Panama City, Tallahassee, places like that. And then you have the southern part of Florida, which is very influenced by the northeast to this day. So this is when it all started. Flagler was also the co-owner of Standard Oil Company with D Rockefeller, so he makes Florida a very popular vacation destination. He built wonderful hotels there, and of course all of us would probably stay at these hotels, these little, they're kind of like your Roadway Inn or your Motel 6. When I go on vacation, these are the places I stay, like the Breakers Hotel here in Palm Beach. So this is one of the Flagler hotels that's still open. These are 5-star hotels. I mean, you got to have a lot of money to stay there. And some of the other Flagler hotels, the oldest one, of course, burned down, but this is one of the original Flagler hotels. Jay Gould, who we talked about earlier on in Presentation 2 with the presidency of Grant, was a New York railroad tycoon, considered by many to be the most unscrupulous and corrupt of the robber barons. Had a substantial interest in many major American railroads. And so what he did essentially was buy people off. He actually made a statement one time, I could pay one half of the working class to kill the other half. And he bought off everybody, from legislators in the state legislature to judges, anyone he needed to grease the wheels to make his company work. He was a major component of the Black Friday scandal of 1869 when gold prices plunged. So this guy was a real manipulator in the business world. Nobody really liked him. He did have, a lot of these people had country estates, so he would stay in New York City most of the year, but he did have a house on the Hudson River that was his country estate, where he would go to in the summers or on the weekends. This is the kind of summer cottage that I'm sure most of us have, to escape for the weekends. Something like the country estate of Lyndhurst here pictured. So, when I go on my vacations on the weekends, I usually stay at places like this, my country estate, to get away from the city for a while. So I'm sure all of us have that kind of experience as well. Cornelius Vanderbilt of the Vanderbilt family was the third wealthiest man in American history, a railroad and steamship tycoon. In fact, he was involved in one of the most important Supreme Court cases in American history, Gibbons v. Ogden, which had to do with steamship traffic on the Hudson River. That was back in 1819 when he was still a young man. But he lived till 1877, built rail lines in New York, Illinois, and other states, established Vanderbilt University in Tennessee, just a really important guy. So he made a lot of money, but the thing about the Vanderbilts is this was a family, then became a family tradition of wealthy individuals. And they built some of the most interesting homes in American history, some of the most lavish homes in American history. So it was not just Cornelius Vanderbilt, but his son and then his grandsons who built these very elaborate and expensive homes. So the Vanderbilt family, when Commodore Vanderbilt, Cornelius Vanderbilt, died, he left most of his wealth to his son, William Vanderbilt. His first wife was already dead, and so his second wife got a small pittance of the family treasure, and she was supported for the rest of her life, but not really in a way that would. I mean, she was very comfortable, but most of the money went to William Vanderbilt, and then of course his sons would then build these very large homes, including the Biltmore Estate. I should say estate, not estates. But estate, the Biltmore Estate in North Carolina. There's a picture of the Biltmore. That is a single-family home. It is the largest single-family home in the United States. So a very large home. You can go tour it today, and the grounds and everything else around it. But they also built other homes like the Breakers here in Rhode Island, and I have a little YouTube there to watch on it. It gives you kind of a look at what the interior of the home was like. This home was only used for 8 weeks a year. And so this is a summer cottage. Again, a summer cottage that I'm sure we would all go stay at in our free time that we have just waiting for us to go for about 8 weeks. The Marble House in Rhode Island, these were all in Newport, Rhode Island, and the Marble House is also a summer cottage. It's called the Marble House because the exterior of the house is marble, solid marble, so you can think about the expense in that. These are, it just boggles the mind to think that these people had these kind of homes for summer cottages. It's such a period of tremendous wealth. We just can't fathom it. James J. Hill of Minnesota was a railroad tycoon called the Empire Builder. He's the only railroad magnate who did not use federal funds to subsidize his lines. So no federal subsidies to build his rail lines, which is impressive because everyone else was using federal funds or government money to do it, but James J. Hill did not. And here's his home in Minnesota. Nice home. Had secret passages and all kinds of things, but kind of pales in comparison to the Vanderbilt fortune. Well, the real dream of American railroad tycoons, though, was to build a line connecting west to east. And this was finally accomplished in 1869, but work began as early as 1859, so the Transcontinental Railroad took about 10 years to complete. In fact, it's rumored that Abraham Lincoln selected the origination point for the line. And this is one of the factors behind Western land legislation in the 1850s. Get people out there, get this land set aside so the railroad companies can get it. Remember the Homestead Act. Railroad companies would often get the land by just putting a house out there and saying that somebody lives there, but nobody did, and then they'd sell it off themselves. They would often get the best land, too. And they would use eminent domain and push people around. This is some pretty seedy stuff. So there's the Transcontinental Line. You can see the Union Pacific going from Iowa all the way to Utah, and then the Central Pacific coming from California to Utah, and they met there in the northern part of the state of Utah. And there is the union of the two lines. Now, what would the impact of the railroads be? Well, of course, this would develop other industries in the United States, steel, timber, telegraph. It also created a national political, social, and economic climate and a tremendous amount of wealth. So as you connect the coasts, the United States becomes smaller. Now it only takes about a week to get from the East Coast to the West Coast, where it used to take a month. That makes everything a lot easier. And, of course, this is going to make the two coasts connected, and of course very important. You don't have to go around the South America anymore to get to California from New York. Some of the other industries, of course, that popped up. George Pullman invented a sleeping car. He called it luxury for the middle class. He had his own little town there in Illinois, Pullman, Illinois, where he built his cars. Now, Pullman was a genius in that he didn't sell his cars, he leased them. So when you got a Pullman sleeping car, you leased the car. And because of that, when you were done with it, the Pullman company took it back, they refurbished it, and then leased it back out again. Pullman was also infamous as a strike breaker, so there was a very famous strike, which we'll talk about in another presentation, where Pullman went in and broke up the strike. He cut wages, but didn't cut the prices in his town. You're paid in company dollars, you stayed in company housing, you didn't cut rent. So this created a very hostile climate there in Pullman, Illinois. The Telegraph, of course, was very much part of this national climate, and the Western Union Telegraph Company was the largest company around from 1851 to the present. Helped create standardized time schedules. They invented the stock ticker, and millions of telegraph messages were sent throughout U.S. history, the last around 1993. But one of the things this is going to do is help facilitate railroad travel, because now you have schedules, trains aren't going to run into each other, you have all kinds of things going on here to help our transportation in the United States, and of course railroad transportation most importantly. Andrew Carnegie, I mentioned him before, a Scottish-born, rags to riches story, second wealthiest man in American history. Really was a self-made man. Came over here with nothing, took a job sweeping floors, and then later started moving up as a telegraph operator, and then started investing. Got involved in railroads and then got involved in steel. And, of course, it was his business acumen that allowed Carnegie Steel to be the largest steel-producing company in the United States. And the thing is, when you look at the impact of Carnegie Steel, so the price of steel went down to minuscule amounts when Carnegie controlled the steel industry. In fact, he bought all his competitors at fair market price. So he really was doing things on the up and up. But of course, people didn't like it because he did corner the steel market at one point. But it was his innovation that allowed this to happen. He was using the Bessemer process for making steel, which was much more efficient. He used vertical integration, which allowed him to control large elements of the steel industry. So he didn't just control the steel, but he also controlled other aspects of steel manufacturing and transportation and other things. So he was involved in all elements, and this is what John D. Rockefeller did as well. I'll talk about that a little bit more with Rockefeller in a second. He sold his company in 1901 to J.P. Morgan for $1 billion at the time. $1 billion, $1901, which would, I mean, that's a tremendous amount of money today. You're looking at, maybe $100 billion. So, I mean, this is a lot of money. And this later became U.S. Steel. He's infamous for his labor policies, but the question is, are they true? In fact, Carnegie increased wages. He improved working conditions for his workers. The thing was, the workers wanted more of a raise than what they got. So, that's often the rub. He would increase it to a high wage for the time, but they wanted even higher wages. So, you had this constant rub. So, to labor, Carnegie was a bad guy. From Carnegie's position, he was doing everything he could to keep labor happy. There's his first mill in Braddock, Pennsylvania. So a lot of pollution. People talk about modern air is polluted, but it used to be that snow came down in Pennsylvania black because of all the soot in the atmosphere. That doesn't happen anymore. There's John P. Morgan, who bought Carnegie's steel company for $1 billion. So he was head of J.P. Morgan and Company, which is still around now. It's J.P. Morgan Chase. So this is later became U.S. Steel, but he was involved in banking, finance, commerce, and industry. Really considered a financial wizard. In fact, he personally stabilized the economy in 1893 and 1907 with his own money. So he injected a tremendous amount of money into the economy to save it. He was also, one of the guys very much behind the creation of the Federal Reserve, and so were some of the other wealthy businessmen at the time. And the Federal Reserve was a way for them to manipulate the monetary supply. And we'll talk about the Federal Reserve a little later on. Andrew Mellon, Secretary of the Treasury from 1921 to 1932, oversaw the Roaring Twenties and the start of the Great Depression, had investments in all major U.S. industries. In fact, Mellon, when the Depression began, told Hoover, don't do anything about it, just let it run its course. Hoover rejected that idea and started intervening tremendously, and of course the Depression was worse because of that. And we'll talk about that when we get to the Depression. But Mellon was a very wealthy guy, was a very successful businessman outside of being Secretary of the Treasury, but his policies, or at least his ideas, were very much part of the economic boom of the 1920s. And then we get to the most wealthy man in American history, or the wealthiest man in American history, if not the world, John D. Rockefeller, who owned Standard Oil Company. He was worth between $300 to $600 billion 2013 dollars. So you're talking about just tremendous wealth. And what he did well was vertical integration and trust, or what we often call monopoly. So what he did is create a trust, the Standard Oil Trust. He invited all his competitors in, and they basically was a cabal of individuals who controlled the oil industry. In fact, about 95% of it at one point. But the thing is, when you look at the price of kerosene, it went down to nothing during this time because of Standard Oil's techniques. His vertical integration cut costs. But there were people who believed that this was hurting people because there were rebates on rail transportation and other things, and competitors couldn't get an edge. So eventually the government went in, and what I mean by vertical integration, like let's say he wanted to ship oil in barrels. He would also own the barrel company that made the barrels, and he'd own the steel company that produced the steel for the barrels or the wood or whatever it was. And he'd own maybe the rail company that even transported the stuff. So he'd own everything, and he would make all the profit. That's vertical integration. When his company was broken up, it became Conoco, Amoco, Chevron, Exxon, and Mobil, and so those are all Standard Oil Company oil refining companies. So when you go out and you buy any of the gasoline there, you're buying Standard Oil gasoline. There's one of his early refineries in Pennsylvania, in fact. Other business improvements included things like the typewriter, the calculator, the telephone, electric lighting. But, of course, what you can say about this period in terms of standard of living, industrialization, while we may criticize it for some of the things that it did, we'll talk about labor and some of those other things in another presentation, it did improve the standard of living dramatically for Americans. So industrialization is going to improve comfort, lifespan, all kinds of things. Even though, at first there's going to be, fits and starts as people, the industries figure out what works, what doesn't work, bad working conditions, these kind of things. So that is going to be a problem with it. But at the same time, people are able to have things that they never had before. They're able to have products they couldn't get before. They're able to heat their homes cheaper. They're able to use steel in things they couldn't use. So technology is advancing, and that is making people more comfortable. So our standard of living today is a byproduct of the Industrial Revolution. To critique it in terms of our comforts that we have will be to reject what we have. And so this is really where it begins. So when you look at standard of living, you cannot critique the Industrial Revolution for bringing a higher standard of living to the Western world, which it has. Disease eradication, other things. We're just much better off in those ways and that way. Now you can talk about food and other things and contamination of food and some of the things that are going on nowadays. But just in terms of getting to the point where we are in our comfort, in our standard of living, you wouldn't have had it without these wealthy individuals and these important business magnates. So were they robber barons or captains of industry? It really depends on who you ask. We'll talk about labor relations, but you also need wealthy people. If you don't have an economy with wealthy people, you don't really have an economy. They make the economy work. They provide jobs. They do things. They take risks. They invest. And so this makes the economy go. When you don't have it, you don't have an economy. And people are finally starting to recognize this, I think. We've flirted for years now with the idea that, governments and government programs create wealth. But even when you have someone like Bono of U2, who has long been a person who has been against the free market, come out and say, well, capitalism is the only thing that's going to raise standard of living and to make a better economy. I mean, he's finally realized, you need those things to ensure that you have a vibrant economy. And wealthy people give away a lot of money. I mean, Carnegie gave away every dime of his money by the time he died through his will. Rockefeller did almost the exact same thing. So these people give away a lot of money, and that creates philanthropy, which is charity. So you don't have charitable organizations without wealthy people who donate to them. So this is very important to recognize. When we criticize the rich and we tear down the rich, we're actually hurting the overall economy in your society and your community and the country at large. So we need to recognize that there is a need for this, and it's not just selfishness. And so that people are going to have money, and some people are going to have more money than you. Everyone, except for John D Rockefeller, had that situation. So we have to think about that when we're starting to critique this particular period of time. We will talk about labor relations in Presentation 7 and some of the things that were going on that were not very savory and how those things were improved over time. All right, that's it. I'll see you for the next presentation.